struggling through life. Been there and done that with trifling people who told me my style would not work. I told them they wrong, been struggling too long. This song is for you, I'm proving you wrong. Get out my way, get out my way, get out my way, get out my way. I'm a genuine person. Like if I love you, I love you. If I don't mess with you, I don't mess with you. It's as simple as that.
If they gleam in the sun while they're spinning, they fit on my truck, and I could remember. And if it came in the stack, no stems, no seeds in the bag, then I could remember. And if it dripped from my wrist and it looked like it shined like blue, then I could remember. But oh, girl, I forgot to be a lover. If it wasn't for the 9 to 5 doubled up overtime, then I could remember. If it wasn't for the Sunday All-Star Weekend game, girl, I could remember. And if it wasn't for the dope, the Jesus show, girl, you know that I could remember. But silly me, oh, tell me how could I ever forget to be your love? Be your life, not to me, love to spend my life thinking all to. Oh, girl, oh, I forgot to be your lover. When she starts bringing up poker and the fights keep getting worse, oh, number in her purse. Better put that one time, yeah. And you know she ain't wearing her ring. Oh, no. When she starts playing little games, coming in it from her. You better put that woman first. If it wasn't for the makeup on my shirt, still I'd be chasing skirts, and I could remember. And if it wasn't for that fight last night, you smashing out my headlights, then I could remember. If it wasn't for parole, steady ducking my PO, girl, you know I could remember. But silly me, babe. Tell me how could I ever forget to be your love? Realize that you need love to spend my life thinking up to you. Oh, I forgot to be your lover. When she starts bringing up poker, and the fights keep getting worse. I'm telling your brother, better put that woman first. She ain't wearing her ring, and she starts playing little games. I'm telling you, brother, you better put that woman first. So many times acting like it wasn't really nothing. So many ways, just to myself, always running. So all that I said, so many words I need you to say. Always came first, even though sometimes felt like second. You know I had to learn a lesson. Sometimes put in some work, and for better or worse, better put that woman first. Fights keep getting worse. I remember in her purse. Put that woman first. Oh yeah, she starts playing little game. I'm gonna say it again. You better put that woman first. She's gonna leave you. Yeah. And she starts playing little games, coming in it from work. We better put that woman first. Man, somebody should have told R. Kelly that. Better put that woman first. What's up, y'all? We back. We back. We back. We back. All right, let me see who up in here. Oh, we got a list of people. Tasha Millie, what's going on? She said, I got my notifications on. Okay, all right, good. That's what's up. Life with Boo. What's up? What's up? What's up? Nettie Boo. Tune the Goon. What up, bro? What's going on? Nikki, what's up? Rocking with the truth. Hey. Miss Thomas, hey, how you doing? Monica Rhea, what's going on? What's going on? Dynamite, what's up? Tammy Guest Beckham finally made it on time. How you doing? Thank you, Miss Beckham. Thanks for coming in. Monica Rhea, thank you. Got Surviving Beauty said, I be sleepy as going to work in the AM. Oh, I'm sorry, Surviving Beauty. I'm sorry. I appreciate you being here, though. Missy, what's up, Miss Missy Power? How you doing? Unspoken Truth by the Unknown. Man, do I got to tell y'all every time I get on here, I love that name. What's going on, Leo Centric? What's going on? How you doing? First time seeing you here. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Earth Goddess in the building. Nisha Jones in the building. Free Bird. Nicole Exo. Geechee girl is here. Y'all me, what's up, what's up, what's up? Unapologetically Hebrew. How you doing? How you doing? Just Videos. Let me see. Who else? West Coast Bells. Vanetta M, how you doing? Welcome in, welcome in. All right, Freebird be cutting up with these. Man, listen, look, I just be hearing stuff, y'all. I'm like, how can I come in? Let me see. What's going on, Mississippi Mama? How you doing? Susie Lopez in the building. Angela Duncan, how you doing? How you doing? Welcome in, welcome in. Kanza, what up, Kanza? How you doing? All right, y'all, I think we ready. Okay, take R. Kelly and give us Tupac back. What's going on? How you doing? That Nurse 1980, how you doing? Welcome in, welcome in. Felicia Martinez, hey, how you doing? Oh, I do a little something. I can throw down a little bit with the vocals. Karen Johnson, how you doing, Queen? What's going on? All right, y'all, let's get to it. Black Girl Beauty, what's going on? Erica Lenz, how you doing? Zoe, hey. Michelle Coffee, how you doing? First time seeing you in here. Welcome in, welcome in. If it's your first time here, please subscribe to the channel. I promise you it's worth it. We putting in work over here, y'all. We got to get the truth out. There's so many lies on top of lies on top of lies out here coming from other sources, y'all. That's why we got to get in these transcripts. That's why we do this, y'all. We do this for the culture, okay? So let's get to it. Let me go ahead and share my screen with y'all. Let me share this here. We're going to get hot right back into it. We're getting right back into the trenches with these transcripts, y'all. All right, we stopped at 2488. Make sure y'all can see this. Let me pull this up. There we go. Okay, so we're going to start with the last thing that was said down here at the bottom. So this is the government talking to, right now, y'all, the person that's up is Mr. Wilson. Mr. Wilson is he's the guy, it says he was a special agent, Homeland Security. But he dealt with the iPhones and Apple and stuff like that, okay? Let's get to it. So the last question from the government was, do you see underneath file name where it says created date and time, 12/12/2015? Do you see that there? Mr. Wilson says yes. The government says lower down where it says lens model iPhone 6 Plus back camera. Mr. Wilson says yes. The government says, you see that there? Mr. Wilson says yes. The government says, now, before continuing speaking with us, before continuing speaking with this, are you familiar with the manners in which an iPhone can back up information that's on the iPhone itself? Mr. Wilson said, I am. The government said, what methods can you use to back up an iPhone? Mr. Wilson said, well, you could back it up to the iCloud or to a specific. Mr. Cannett says, I'm going to object. What? What the hell are you objecting to? Oh, anyway, the judge says he's just testifying generally about how to back things up. I think it is an evidence, isn't it?
Ms. Cruz Melendez says, this document, yes. Kenneth said, it's in evidence, but he's not qualified. What? Y'all, they are reaching. Good grief. He's not qualified. Really? Oh, okay. Overruled. The government says, what are the methods in which you might back up information that is on an iPhone? Mr. Wilson said, well, you could back it up to the cloud or to a specific device like a computer or a laptop. The government said, based on your review of Government's Exhibit 476, we are here. Here we see the created date and time of 12/12/2015, and also lens model iPhone 6 plus back camera. Is that consistent with the image in which is listed Government's Exhibit 476 having been taken by iPhone and then backed up to Government's Exhibit 486? Mr. Wilson says yes. The government says, now turning our attention to Government's Exhibit 476A. Is this the image that is reflected in the partial forensic analysis report? Mr. Wilson says yes. The government says, now directing your attention to Government's Exhibit 475. Similar question here. Below the image that we see in Government's Exhibit 475, do you see the created date and time of 12/12/2015? Mr. Wilson says yes. The government says, now in the portion here where it says lens model iPhone 6 plus back camera, based on your review, is this consistent with this image being taken by an iPhone, then being backed up to Government's Exhibit 486? Mr. Wilson says it is. The government says, now Government's Exhibit 475A, is it correct? That is the image associated with this forensic analysis report 475. Mr. Wilson says yes. The government says, now just to be clear, and I'll use Government's Exhibit 476 for that purpose. 475 for that purpose. As you testified that both 475 and 476, the dates and the information in the forensic report, you testified that it is consistent with the image being taken by an iPhone, then subsequently being backed up in Government's Exhibit 486. Is it also fair to say that the created date, the 12/12/2015, that we've looked at both Government's Exhibit 475 and 476, that's the date that is backed up on Government's Exhibit 486? Mr. Wilson says yes. The government says, now turning your attention to Government's Exhibit 477, turning to page 4. Your Honor, can this be published publicly? The judge says okay. The government says, again, you testified that this is an excerpt of the forensic analysis report, correct? Mr. Wilson says correct. The government says below the image that we are here, below the image we see here is another created date, 12/12/2015. Do you see that there? Mr. Wilson says yes. The government says below here, where I'm pointing, you see the information about make, model, make being Apple, model being iPhone 6 Plus. Do you see that there? Mr. Wilson says yes. The government says, now just above where it says 841 Apple, do you see a date created or date, time, local, October 19th, 2015? Do you see that there? Mr. Wilson says yes. The government says, now based on your review of these documents and reports, is this consistent with an image by an iPhone on October 19, 2015, and then backed up to a Government's Exhibit 486 on 12/12/2015? Mr. Wilson says it is. The government says, I'd like to direct your attention to the reference to GPS latitude and GPS longitude. Do you see that there? Mr. Wilson says, I do. The government says, what does that mean? Mr. Wilson says, that's the physical location that the iPhone was located when it took the photo in question. The government says, that's the physical location that the iPhone was located when it took the photo in question. I'm sorry, Mr. Wood. Yeah, that's what Mr. Wilson said. The government said, now directing your attention to Government's Exhibit 478. Is that another excerpt from your analysis of Government's Exhibit 486? Mr. Wilson says, yes. The government says, now directing your attention to page 4. Again, we see here below the image, created date time as 12/12/2015. Do you see that? The government says, the government says, he says yes. The government says below there is another created date, time, and local, October 19, 2015. Do you see that there? Mr. Wilson says yes. The government says, now below that we see make, model, iPhone 6 Plus. Do you see that there? Mr. Wilson says yes. The government says, now there again, GPS coordinates. Is that correct? Mr. Wilson says yes. The government says, now based on your review, is this also consistent with the iPhone Plus taking the photograph depicted in Government's Exhibit 478 on October 19th, 2015, and then the subsequently being backed up on Government's Exhibit 486 on 12/12/2015? Mr. Wilson says it is. Then the government says, now, and is Government's Exhibit 478A the same image that's indicated in Government's Exhibit 478? Mr. Wilson says, yes. The government says, now, directing our attention now to Government's Exhibit 479. Is that another excerpt of the report you created with respect to your analysis of Government's Exhibit 486? Mr. Wilson says it is. The government says, and at the top, we see an image here, correct? Mr. Wilson says, yes. The government says, and below the image, is there a created date and time of 12/12/2015? Mr. Wilson says, yes. The government, the judge says, is it fair to say that all of these photographs that you are looking at those times is your testimony the same for all of these in terms of when they are created and when they were? Is it backed up or loaded? The government says backed up. The witness says yes. The court says, is it the same method that would apply? Mr. Wilson says yes. The judge says, okay, I'm sorry, go ahead. The government says, I promise I will start to move through these. The judge says, I was just clarifying for myself. The government says, and again, the government says Exhibit 479, we have a created date of 12/12/2015. Based on your review, is it fair to say that that's the backup date? Mr. Wilson says, yes, it is. Government says, now with respect to the middle here, where I'm pointing, created date and time, local, October 19, 2015. That's the date that the iPhone 6 took the photograph. Is that correct? Government says, I'm sorry, Mr. Wilson says, iPhone 6 Plus. Ms. Cruz Melendez says, now, Your Honor, if we could just do jury only. So, the judge says, sure. The government says, turning your attention to Government's Exhibit 487. Is this again an excerpt of the forensic analysis report that you created with respect to Government's Exhibit 486? Mr. Wilson says it is. The government says, and below the file name, is there a created date / time of 12/12/2015? Mr. Wilson says, yes. The government says, and further down, do you see a created date and time local October 3rd, 2015? Mr. Wilson says, yes. The government says, and a little bit below that, do you see the make of Apple and the model of iPhone 6 Plus? Do you see that there? Mr. Wilson says, yes. The government says, and GPS coordinates are there as well, correct? Mr. Wilson says, correct. The government said, and again, as you previously testified, is that fair to say that the GPS coordinates are the location where the photograph was taken? Mr. Wilson said, correct. The government says, and is it also fair to say, as you pointed out, that the image taken by the iPhone 6 Plus was taken on October 3rd, 2015, and then subsequently backed up to the government's exhibit 486? Mr. Wilson says, yes. The government says, one moment, Your Honor. The judge says, okay. Then the government says, government exhibit 487, is that just the same image that's included in government's exhibit 487, the excerpt of the forensic examination report? Mr. Wilson says it is. The government says, and just to be clear, these are redaction boxes here, correct? Mr. Wilson says, yes. The judge says, that part means of an image is taken out. Is that it? The witness says, yes, correct. The judge says, okay. Then the government says, now, directing your attention to government's exhibit 488. And again, that's a forensic. That's an excerpt of the forensic analysis report you created with respect to government's exhibit 486. Mr. Wilson says, yes. The government said, now there's an image at the top. And underneath that image, do you see the created date and time of 12/12/2015? Government, Mr. Wilson says, yes. Government says, and there are also GPS coordinates here. Mr. Wilson said, yes. The government said, listed, is it fair to say that you testified previously that based on your review, the image was taken by an iPhone 6 Plus on October 3rd, 2015, and then subsequently backed up to the government's exhibit 486 on 12/12/2015? Mr. Wilson said, correct. The government said, now turn your attention to government's exhibit 488A. Is that the same image that's included in your forensic examination report? Mr. Wilson said, yes. The government said, and again, is this a redaction box covering a portion of that photograph? Mr. Wilson said, yes. The government said, now turn your attention to now government's exhibit 489. Again, is that an excerpt of your forensic examination report with respect to government's exhibit 486? Mr. Wilson says, yes. The government says, now turning your attention to government's exhibit, page 4 of the exhibit again. Do you see where or see here a created date below the file name of 12/12/2015? Mr. Wilson says, yes. Then the government says, and then an additional created date / time of October 3rd, 2015. Do you see that there? Mr. Wilson says, yes. Then the government says, and do you also see the make of Apple model as a iPhone 6 Plus? Mr. Wilson says, yes. Then the government says, and there's also coordinates listed, correct? Mr. Wilson says, correct. Then the government says, and again, is it consistent with the iPhone 6 Plus taking this image on October 3rd, 2015, and subsequently backing up that photograph on 12/12/2015 to government's exhibit 486? Mr. Wilson said, yes. The government said government's exhibit 489 is just the same photograph that's listed in government's exhibit 489. Mr. Wilson says, yes. The government says, and also, is there a redaction box in the middle of the photograph? The witness says, yes. The government says, directing your attention to government's exhibit 690 again. Is that an excerpt from your forensic examination report with respect to government's exhibit 486? Mr. Wilson says, yes. Government says, turning to page 4. There's an image at the top in the file number and under file name. Do you see the created date of 12/12/2015? Mr. Wilson says, yes. The government says in the middle of where my finger. Hold on, y'all. Yeah. Of where my finger is pointing here now. Do you see created date / time October 3rd, 2015? Do you see that date? Mr. Wilson says yes. The government says, do you also see where it says make, model, an iPhone 6? And do you see that there? Mr. Wilson says yes. The government said, are there also coordinates listed? Mr. Wilson said there are. The government says, and is this consistent with an image that's listed in the exhibit being taken on October 3rd, 2015, and then subsequently being backed up to the government's exhibit 46 on December 12th, 2015? Mr. Wilson says yes. The government says 490A is the same photograph included in 490. Mr. Wilson says yes. And the government said, and are there redaction boxes covering the portions of individual 490? Mr. Wilson says yes. The judge says, did you place those redaction boxes on it? Mr. Wilson says, I did not. The government says, okay. Then Mr. Wilson says, I did not. The judge says, okay. And Mr. Wilson says, is it fair to say that the images, when you imagine or imaged government's exhibit 486, and you did your analysis of redaction boxes, you didn't place those there, correct? Mr. Wilson said, correct. Government's exhibit 491 again is an excerpt of your forensic examination report of government's exhibit 486. Mr. Wilson said, yes. The government said, turn your attention to government's exhibit. Excuse me, the page 4 of the exhibit. There's an image there. Do you see that? Mr. Wilson says, yes. The government says, and underneath the image, do you see created date / time of December 12, 2015? Mr. Wilson says, yes. The government says, do you also see created date / time local October 4th, 2015? Do you see that there? Mr. Wilson says, yes. The government says, do you also see where it says make, model, iPhone 6? Mr. Wilson says, yes. Government says in there also coordinates listed. Mr. Wilson says, yes. The government says, government's exhibit 491, is that the same image that's listed in government's exhibit 491? Mr. Wilson says, yes. The government says, and again, there was a redaction box that was subsequently placed that you didn't place there, correct? Mr. Wilson said, yes. The government says, turning your attention to government's exhibit 492, is this also an excerpt of your forensic examination report of government's exhibit 486? Mr. Wilson says, yes. Government says, turning to page 4, is there an image there? Mr. Wilson says, yes. The government says, in there, the image file name, do you see the created date of 12/12/2015? Mr. Wilson says, yes. The government says, further down, do you see the created date / time date local October 6, 2015? Mr. Wilson says, yes. The government says, and is the make and model the iPhone 6 Plus listed here as well? Mr. Wilson says, yes. The government says there are also coordinates, correct? Mr. Wilson says, correct. Government says, and again, is this consistent with the iPhone 6 Plus taking the photograph included in October 6, 2015, and then subsequently being backed up to government's exhibit 486? Mr. Wilson says, yes. The judge says, can I see the parties at the side for just 1 second? Don't need the court reporter. So there's a sidebar. Then the government said, Your Honor, for the sake of clarity, counsel is conferred. The defense counsel stipulates that the redaction boxes that appear of the images from the forensic analysis, the image that I've been going through with respect to government's exhibit 486, were not on the images at the time that the device was analyzed by Agent Wilson. The judge says, okay. And the government says, and that they were placed by the government for purposes of in-court review. The judge says, I think I told you and jurors when you were selected that stipulations are just agreements between the parties, that they agree on certain evidence, and that's what it is. Go ahead. Then the lawyer said, and then finally, with respect to government's exhibit 492, is that the same image that was in 492? Mr. Wilson says yes. The government says, and again, there were redaction boxes that were not present at the time that you imaged government's exhibit 486, correct? And Mr. Wilson says correct. The government said, if I could just show the witness, Your Honor, government's exhibit 691. The government said, Agent Wilson, do you recognize government's exhibit 961? Mr. Wilson said yes. The government says, and what is it? Mr. Wilson said it's a summary of the items of evidence that just reviewed with the creation date, the longitude and latitude coordinates. Excuse me, y'all. I'm trying to kill these doggone gnats. I hate gnats. All right. And prior to your testimony here today, based on the latitude and longitude coordinates that were present in the excerpted forensic analysis report, were you able to determine the corresponding action? Mr. Wilson said yes. The government says, Your Honor, the government moves to admit government's exhibit 961 into evidence. Mr. Cannon said no objection. The judge says, okay, that's an evidence. The government says, if you could publish, Your Honor, the above referred to exhibit was published. Then the government said, the judge says, in other words, when you were pointing out those coordinates, these are just the coordinating cities in those exhibits. Is that right? The witness said, Mr. Wilson said the coordinating addresses. The judge says addresses, right? And then Mr. Wilson says yes. The government says, okay, thanks. Now, the government says, first looking at the first column here, the government says exhibit 487A. There was a creation date of October 3rd, 2015, correct? Mr. Wilson said yes. The government said, and for example, with respect to this, that was based on the creation date listed on government exhibit 487. Your analysis report, is that correct? Mr. Wilson said yes. Government said now the coordinates latitude and longitude were also based on the coordinates of where the iPhone 6 Plus took the photograph and listed the government and listed in government's exhibit 487, correct? Mr. Wilson said correct. The government said, and then there's a corresponding location, correct? Mr. Wilson said yes. The government said, is the same process true for all the exhibits listed in the first column here? Mr. Wilson said yes. The government said, so going through with respect to government's exhibit, the judge says, I don't know if we have to go through all of them. The government says, I won't. The judge says, I think it's probably not necessary. Ms. Cruz Melendez says, I won't. The government says, with respect to the government's exhibit 487A, the corresponding location for the coordinates of latitude and longitude here at Oakland Convention Center, 550 10th Street on Oakland, California, 94607, correct? Mr. Wilson said, yes. Government said, and going down the chart, each one of these locations corresponds with the latitude and longitude coordinates that were in the excerpted analysis report that we went through, correct? Mr. Wilson said, correct. Cannick said, can I just get the exhibit number again? The government said 961. Cannick said 961. Thank you. Then the government said, you testified previously with respect to the photographs and images that were taken by an iPhone 6 Plus. Generally speaking, based on your expertise, when text or photographs are taken on an iPhone, is it the local time where the iPhone is? For example, where the coordinates, latitude and longitude, the local time date that is used that appears on the text or the photograph that is defaulted with respect to an iPhone. So that was a very unclear question. I'm going to back up and I'm going to ask the question again. Dates appear on the phone in any of these. That's not a very good question either. Okay. But I would rather have you tell it than me ask the details. Mr. Wilson says it usually defaults to the time zone that the phone is physically in by default unless it's changed. The judge says, I see. The government says nothing further. The judge says, okay, any cross-examination? Koenig said very briefly. The judge says, okay. Koenig says, sir, you testified and told us that this was a partial forensic. The judge says, turn on your microphone. Koenig says, I think you testified and told us that this was a partial forensic analysis. Mr. Wilson said, yes. The government said, what is a partial forensic analysis? Mr. Wilson said, so we image the device, and then there's an electronic version of the analysis of that device using different analysis software. The digital report that we provide the case agent with is everything that was on the phone. So it will have text messages, it will have photos, it will have call logs. Hold on, y'all. I'm sorry. What's up, Stan? What's up, man? Hey, I'm live right now. What's going on? Yeah, you didn't have one. Okay. Yeah, I am. Okay. No, I don't. Let me call right back, Stan. Okay. All right. Sorry about that, y'all. Okay. So it says here, we'll have text messages, it will have photos, it will have call logs, it will have notes, any kind of encrypted chats like WeChat or WhatsApp, Facebook messaging. So all that is presented to the agent in a digital report. And then they could go through it and just look at specific sections of it. So they could go through it and cherry pick the ones that they want. The government said objection. The judge said sustained. Koenig said, so they could go through it and pick out the ones that they want. Mr. Wilson said to print, yes. The government said, thank you. Government says, just brief clarification. This is a redirect examination, y'all. The government says, Agent Wilson, when you analyze the exhibits that we have just gone through, you created a report of all the information that was on each one of those devices, correct? Mr. Wilson says, correct, yes. The government says, and you provided that full report to the agents, correct? Mr. Wilson said, I did, yes. The government said, when we went through the partial results or the excerpted reports, those are portions of the full analysis report you created, correct? Mr. Wilson said, correct. The government says nothing further. The judge says, okay. Anything else, Mr. Cannon? Mr. Cannon says nothing. The judge says, the court says, just hold on for 1 second. The judge says, just hold on for 1 second. There's a pause. The judge says, I'm just trying to coordinate with when your lunch gets here so that we can make the best use of our time. Do you have another witness available? Ms. Geddes says, we do, although that might be more productive if we broke for lunch. The judge says, let's try to squeeze all we can out of the time that we have. Why don't you call your next witness? The judge said, the government says, okay. The court says, let me excuse you. The witness is excused. The witness says, thank you. The witness steps down. Then the government says, the government calls Mike Wilson. Then the government says, the judge says, Mike Wilson. The government says, yes. The court says, okay. So then the courtroom deputy says, Mr. Wilson, please raise your right hand. The courtroom deputy says, please state your name for the record. The witness says, Michael Wilson. The judge says, okay, so just a couple of things before we start. Please don't speak too quickly or speak over the person that's asking you questions. The court reporter takes down everything that you say, and if you speak too quickly or you talk over someone, she can't get what you're trying to say. And then the jury can't hear you. If there's any question that you want to have clarified or repeated, just tell me that you want to have what you want to have clarified or repeated. Tell me that, and I will direct the lawyers to rephrase it, or just do your best to answer. Best to answer only at the question that you are being asked. Okay. The witness says, okay. Then the judge says, okay, speaking to the microphone. Hold on for a second. Pause. The judge says, okay, go ahead. So Mike Wilson is up, y'all. We're about to find out who Mike Wilson is. The government is about to examine him. I don't mean no harm, y'all. I don't know if y'all could tell, but them doggone all that phone and was this the right image and was this the right? That thing almost wore me out. That thing almost wore your boy out. Woo! All right, let's see if this one pick up. Here we go. Mike Wilson, called as a witness, having been duly first sworn and affirmed, was examined and testified as follows. Direct examination. Here go the government. How are you employed? Mr. Wilson says, I'm a special agent for Homeland Security Investigations. The lawyer said, what is your title? The government, he says special agent. The government said, now, are you assigned to a particular unit within the Department of Homeland Security? Mr. Wilson says, yes. I'm also certified as a computer forensics agent. The government said, how long have you been certified as a computer forensics agent? Mr. Wilson said full-time for 18 months and then the last 2 years as collateral duty. The government says, and you have a relative who is also a computer forensic department. Okay, that's Chris Wilson. I figured they was brothers. Okay, forensic agent at the Department of Homeland Security. Mr. Wilson says, yes, I do. The government says, Chris Wilson. And then Mr. Wilson says, yes. The government says, how are you related? He says, yes, he is my cousin. All right. So the government says, what are your duties and responsibilities as a computer forensic agent at the Department of Homeland Security? Mr. Wilson says, to assist case agents with the proper seizure, proper evidence collection, and then the extraction of analysis of digital evidence. The government says, I want to direct your attention to July 11th of 2019. Did you participate in the execution of a search warrant on that date? Oh boy. Here we go. Let's see. Government says, I'm showing the witness what's been marked for identification as Government's Exhibit 345. I'm going to show counsel first. The judge says, all right. Then the government says, do you recognize that? Mr. Wilson says, what is it? The government said, this phone was seized from the defendant's hands during the execution of an arrest warrant. Mr. Wilson says, And I'm sorry. No. I'm sorry. Dang, I'm sorry, y'all. Let me back up. The government says, do you recognize that? Mr. Wilson says yes. The government said, what is it? Mr. Wilson said, this phone was seized from the defendant's hands during the execution of an arrest warrant. The government says, and was the individual from whom it was seized Robert Kelly? Mr. Wilson says, yes. The government says, do you see him in the courtroom today? Mr. Wilson says, yes. The government says, can you point him out and describe an article of his clothing? Mr. Wilson says, sitting on the far table wearing a blue jacket with a blue tie. The government says, the judge says, indicating the defendant. The government says, now, after you receive the, I'm sorry, let me publish it, please. The above referred exhibit was published. The government said, now, you may have already testified to this, but what is it? But what is that, by the way? Mr. Wilson said, this is an iPhone, Apple iPhone. The government said, and after the Apple iPhone was seized from the defendant on June 11, 2019, what, if anything, did you do with it? Mr. Wilson says at that time it was processed to attempt to crack the password. The government says, all right, and were you ultimately present when the password was cracked? Mr. Wilson said, no, I was not. The government says, may I approach? The judge says, yes. The government says, I'm showing the witness what's been marked for identification as Government's Exhibit 347. I'm going to show counsel too. So then the government says, now, do you recognize Government's Exhibit 347? Mr. Wilson says, yes. The government says, and did you conduct a forensic examination of Government's Exhibit 347? Mr. Wilson said, yes, I did. The government says, the government offers Exhibit 347. Koenig said, no objection. The judge says, all right, that's an evidence. Then Government's Exhibit 347 received an evidence. The government says, and just briefly, I'll hold it up. So then the government says, what is Government's Exhibit 347? Mr. Wilson says, it is an iPad. It is an Apple iPad. The judge says, where did you get that? Where did you, were you just about to ask that? The government said, were you present when it was seized, when that was seized? Mr. Wilson says, yes, I was. The government said, where was that seized from? Mr. Wilson says, that was in the residence of the defendant. The government says, and was that residence located in Chicago, Illinois? Mr. Wilson says, yes, it was. The government says, at 401 North Wabash Avenue in apartment 48F, as in Frank. Mr. Wilson says, yes. The government says, and is that building located at 401 North Wabash, is that also known as the Trump Towers? Mr. Wilson says, yes. The government says, is that building located at 401 North Wabash, is that also as the Trump Towers? Mr. Wilson says, yes, it is. Government says, I'm showing the witness what's been marked for identification as 326 as well as 326A through J, 327, 328, 329, 336, 330. Sorry for being out of order, and 341 and 343. Mr. Cannon said, excuse me, just let me get the exhibit numbers again. Ms. Geddes says, sure. 326 as well as 326A through H, 327, 328, 329, and 30, 336, and 336A. I might have just added 336, and then 341 through 343. The government said, now, prior to your testimony today, did you have a chance to look at these exhibits? Mr. Wilson says, yes, I did. Mr. Cannon said, Your Honor, I'm going to ask for a sidebar. The judge said, sure. All right, so here we go. Sidebar conference held. The judge says, you know, their lunch is here right now. So maybe we'll break now and then tell me what the issue is. Mr. Scholar says, sure. The judge says, let me excuse them and we'll do it in open court. Let me see here. Then the judge says, I'm told your lunches are here, so I think it is good time to break. Do not discuss the case at all and enjoy your lunch. We'll see you, let's say 2:30. Have a good lunch. The courtroom deputy says, all rise. The judge says, okay, everyone can sit down and you can take the witness out. We'll see you after lunch. The witness steps down. The judge says, Mr. Scholar, I'm just going to ask you to use the microphone so I can hear. I must confess, I don't know what the exhibits are and about we are about to see. Should I look at them? The government says, do you want to do this as a sidebar? Mr. Scholar says, yes, we should do it at sidebar, please. The judge says, all right. So then they do a sealed order of the court, y'all. They did a sealed sidebar, which means we cannot hear what was on, what they talk about as far as that iPad is concerned, which I'm sure they want to talk about as far as what was on that iPad. Okay? But we'll find out later if we ever do. As you see, they talk for a long time here. My goodness. Woo. Okay, so that was the end of that, it looks like. Okay, then they say, okay, I think we will break for now, break for lunch for now. We'll be back at 2:30. A recess in proceedings was taken. Okay, here's the afternoon session, y'all. Here's the afternoon session. All right. We're going to go a little bit more, and then I'm going to let y'all get out of here. In open court, jury not present, parties present. The clerk says, all rise. The judge says, everybody can have a seat. All right, just before we bring the witness in, have the parties had a chance to think about what we discussed? I am prepared to rule on it. Mr. Koenig says, Your Honor, before you rule, might we be given the opportunity to brief it? The judge says, well, Mr. Koenig says, I don't think anything is coming in today. The judge says, nothing is coming in today. I will tell you what I'm thinking about, just so I do not surprise anyone. Mr. Koenig said, sure. The judge says, I think the first video is clearly relevant to come through the witness Anna. The second one, however, is cumulative. I think it is unfairly prejudicial, and it is not related to anybody who is testifying, so I'm excluding that. Do you still need to brief, or do you want to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory? Mr. Koenig said, let me find out from Mr. Scholar which is the first and which is the second. The judge says, okay, yes, speak to him about that. But the only caveat that is as to the caveat when everything is that there is some suggestion that I cannot imagine what it could be. But if there is some suggestion that it did not happen or some way that the door gets open, yes. But I think the evidence as it relates to the victim, the witness who is going to testify is clearly relevant, not only to what her own experience was, but what the experience was of the other witnesses, and specifically Jane, who testified. And I mean, I think it is fair to say that for a lot of people, including me, it is very difficult to imagine that people would engage in this kind of conduct. And so the evidence of it is relevant. And so that is my ruling. Y'all, I don't know what's on that iPad, but they must have watched it, and it must have shook the hell out of the defense. Ooh, wee. The government said, if you still want to brief it, you can. Mr. Cannon said, thank you, Your Honor. The judge says, okay, all right, I guess you could brief it too. Ms. Geddes says, all right, I was planning to offer it now, though. I am not going to publish it. The judge says, I mean, I do not think it should come into evidence. So I am, Ms. Geddes says, no, I'm sorry. I was going to offer the one involving Anna. The judge says, yes, it can be offered into evidence. It is not going to be played right now. The government said, that's right. The judge says, there is no problem with that. Is there? Mr. Cannon said, I'm just thinking about it, Your Honor. The judge says, turn on your, Mr. Cannon said, oh. The judge says, because the witness is here now. So I don't think that there is any dispute that the evidence is on the defendant's computer. Mr. Cannon says, yes, I understand, Your Honor. I understand perfectly. The judge says, all right. So that is the part of it. It will. The foundation has been established, though, or will be established through this witness. Mr. Cannon said, I was just a little confused because I didn't know who Anna was. The judge says, I see. Do you know now? Cannon says, I know now, yes. The government said, okay. I think we're all on the same page. Shall we get anything else before we get the witness? Miss Becker. Oh, boy, here she go. Here go Miss Blank Becker. Miss Becker says, I'm sorry, Judge. Can we also brief the issue, other issue with regards to the introduction of some of the videos that involved? I mean, my understanding is this was talked about at sidebar as well, or no? The judge says, that is what we were just talking about. Ms. Geddes says, no, I think Ms. Becker says, not those videos, Judge. Ms. Geddes says, there are additional videos that we within the last, within that list that we seek to offer right now, which were not raised before Your Honor at the last sidebar. The judge says, well, are those similar to what they are not? Are those similar to what? Or they are not the same as? Ms. Geddes says they are not the same. The judge says, do they involve people who are testifying or conduct that is an issue? There's an issue. Ms. Geddes says the government says there is conduct that's an issue, and yes, people are testifying at will. The judge says, Mr. Scholar says, yes, Judge. The judge says, can you get a microphone? Mr. Scholar says, yes. The judge says, thanks so much. You can sit down if that is easier. Mr. Scholar says, sure, Judge, thank you. The judge says, these are videos that the government wants to admit, though this witness that may involve 3 people. The judge said, the judge says, right? Mr. Scholar says, and the judge says, there has been testimony about that. Mr. Scholar says, and I understand, Judge. I know you've ruled on that previously. However, the judge says, was there an objection to it? Mr. Scholar says, there was an objection. I believe the government said that they were going to play snippets first. We wanted to know what snippets they're intending to play. Man, this dude, oh my gosh. The judge says, well, nobody is playing anything today. Ms. Geddes says, that's correct. The judge says, as I understand it, and I could really be wrong on this because there are a number of motions in limine. I don't recall any specific motions in limine about video evidence. And correct me if I am wrong about that. I just do not recall that there was a motion to preclude anything. So I am a little bit in the dark about some of the things that we are talking about. What I would suggest is, as I said, with respect to that other evidence, this is a foundational witness who you probably could have stipulated to that he recovered this laptop or whatever this is. And I do not think there is any real dispute that this stuff is on there. So the question is, which of it comes into evidence? I made my ruling, so you can try to persuade me that I am wrong about the one that we walked about that side. There is no application before me on the other ones unless you are making one now. Mr. Scholar says, Judge, we make one now with respect to, the judge says, but I do not know what you're asking about because I would need to identify what the videos are and to whom they relate. There has clearly been testimony by multiple witnesses that one of the features of their time with the defendant was that he was taping things on a pretty consistent basis. So they are clearly relevant to that testimony. But again, I am just speaking generally here because of what has been represented to me. This isn't something that anybody litigated before. So the witness is here. I'm trying to move the trial along a little bit. My suggestion is that he can testify to what is on there, and then we can have a conversation about which of the videos comes in. But I would be happier, but I would have been happier to have this conversation before now. Mr. Scholar says, understood, Judge. The judge says, so why don't we proceed that way? Nobody is playing anything today, as far as I understand. And so I think, why don't we finish the witness? Who comes after this, by the way? Ms. Geddes says, we have a witness who is en route, and I believe she will be next. And her name is Alexis. The judge says, okay. Also, but no videos related to Alexis, correct? Ms. Geddes says, no videos related to Alexis. The government said, Mr. Canick said, I just want to know from the government. They said she is en route. The government says she is on the ground. Mr. Canick said, okay. Ms. Geddes says, yes. Mr. Canick says, okay. The judge says she is in the Bronx River Parkway. Kidding? All right. Shall we get the witness? Ms. Geddes says, yes. So just to be clear, my team has corrected me. There are videos, but not that type of video. The court says, the judge says, okay, all right, go ahead. The witness enters the courtroom. Y'all, it is about to get real juicy. All the stickies, where all the stickies at? Man, y'all need to put stickies, pancakes all through this because it's about to get real sticky right now. Real sticky. Okay? Whew. Let me get something to drink. Okay. All right. I'm seeing the stickies. Okay, good. Here we go, y'all. Here we go. The clerk says, all rise. The clerk says, you may be seated. The judge says, all right, jurors, welcome back. We are ready to proceed with the direct examination of the witness. Here we go. Ms. Geddes says, thank you. The clerk is reminded he is still under oath. The witness says yes. The government says, all right, before we broke for lunch, I had showed you a series of exhibits, 326, 326A through J, 327, 328, 329, 336, and 341 through 343. Do you recall those exhibits? Mr. Somebody said, go get Sly Fox. 100 devices, you silly. Mr. Wilson said yes. The government says, and do those exhibits reflect partial examination reports. Hey, listen, y'all might want to timestamp what we just went over, because this is critical, y'all. This is critical. The judge just put it out there that all the stuff that they say this man has done is on that damn video. Are y'all sure y'all want to do this today? Oh my gosh. Okay, let me get to it. Ooh. Here we go. The government says, and do these exhibits reflect partial examination reports from your forensic examination of Government Exhibit 345, which was that iPad that was introduced into evidence earlier? Matter of fact, hold on. I need to mark this myself, y'all. That was on page right here. This was page 2533. This is when the judge is saying, y'all about to, hold up, where my pen at? 2533. So this is 2533, y'all. That's day 11. Okay. All right. I had to make sure I know where I'm going. Because yeah. Okay. All right, here we go. Mr. Wilson says, yes, it does. Okay. And then let me see. The government says, at this time, the government offers, one moment. I'm showing the witness what's been marked for identification as 327A and 327B. This is already in evidence. Do you recognize 327A and 327B? Mr. Wilson says, yes, I do. The government says, and are those your initials there? Mr. Wilson said, yes. The government says, and have you had an opportunity to review 327A and 327B? Government says, Mr. Wilson says, yes. Oh, the government says, are those videos that were recovered on Government Exhibit 347? The witness says, yes. The government says, and now I'm showing just the witness what's been marked for identification: 328A, 330A, 342A, 329A, and 341A, and 343. So, y'all, I know I done had y'all on here for about an hour and 30. How long? We got on here 8:30. Y'all been on about an hour. Now, are y'all tired? Y'all ready to go? Or if y'all want me to keep reading, y'all say keep reading, or y'all want me to just come back tomorrow? If y'all want me to keep reading, put a 1 in the chat. If you want me to keep reading, put a 1 in the chat. If not, I'll let y'all get some rest. I know some of y'all got to get to work tomorrow. I don't want to be rude. Y'all want me to keep reading? If you do, put a 1 in the chat. Okay. All right. Y'all saying keep reading. Keep reading. Keep reading. Somebody said forget work. Okay. Okay. All right. Okay. Okay. All right. All right. All right. All right. All right. Here we go. Okay. Let's keep it going. Let's keep it going. Y'all silly. All right. No days off. No days off. Stop playing, bro. Y'all said stop playing. All right. Here we go, y'all. Let's go. Let's go. All right. Government said, do you recognize that? Mr. Wilson said, yes. The government said, is that a CD containing videos as well? Oh, my gosh. Woo-wee! Y'all, did they not say there's no videos? Did they not say there's no videos? Oh, my gosh. Oh, my gosh. Oh, my gosh. Mr. Wilson says, yes, it is. The government said, and were those videos also recovered from the iPad, which is in evidence as Government Exhibit 347? Mr. Wilson said, yes. The government said that was recovered from the defendant's residence. Mr. Wilson said, correct. The government said, are these your initials listed here? Mr. Wilson said, yes. Let me plug my phone in, y'all. Hold on. Okay. At this time, the government offers 326 and 326A through J. 327, 328, 328A. Thank you, Take R. Kelly. Thank you. Appreciate y'all. 328, 329, 329A, 336, 336A, 341, 342, and 343, along with 341A, and 342A, and 343A. So the judge says, subject to the discussion that we had before, those are admissible. Government exhibits 326, 326A through J, 327, 328, 328A, 329, 329A, 336, 336A, 341, 342, 343, 341A, 342A, 343A are received in evidence. Candidate says, thank you, Your Honor. The judge says, thank you. Ms. Geddes says, I'm going to provide. May I approach, Your Honor? The judge says, yes. Mr. Geddes says, I'm going to provide the witness, Government Exhibit 326. And may I publish to the jury only? This is 326. Thanks for reading. Forget work. All right, this is 326A, y'all. 326B and 326C. The government says, do you recognize the photos shown in 326A through 326C? Mr. Wilson says, yes. The government says, and are those photographs, the photographs that were on the defendant, on the iPad that was seized from the defendant's residence in evidence as Government Exhibit 347? Mr. Wilson says, yes, they were. The government says, and if you're referring to what's in front of you, Government Exhibit 326, I want you to direct your attention to the image in 1914. Do you see that? The witness says, yes. The government says, and I believe that corresponds with what's shown as 326A. Is that correct? Mr. Wilson says, yes, it does. The government says, now, are you able to see from looking at 326 when that particular photograph was taken? Mr. Wilson says, yes, I can. The government says, when was it taken? The witness says, January 14th of 2018. The government says, are you able to determine with what it was taken? Mr. Wilson says, yes. The government said, what device? Mr. Wilson says, it was taken with an Apple iPad Pro. The government says, and are there a series of photographs of that individual in the same attire that were taken also on January 14th of 2018 and specifically redirected? Thank you very much, Latrice. Thank you. Redirected to your attention. Okay. Okay. And directed your attention to the image 1915, 1916, 1917, 1918, 1919, and 1920. Mr. Wilson says yes. The government said, and were each of those images also photographs taken on January 14, 2018? Mr. Wilson said yes. The government said, and are they taken using the same device that you just identified on the iPad Pro? Mr. Wilson said, yes, they were. Government said, not just referred to a series of images. Is that just, I said image, I think. And then it's listed as image 1915. Is that just the file name that a particular photograph was saved? Mr. Wilson said, yes. That's the default naming convention for Apple products. The government says, now, what I want to direct your attention to, what's identified in Government Exhibit 326 or what's listed in Government 326 as image 2026 and 2025. Can you take a look at those? Mr. Wilson says yes. The government says, I'm showing you again to the jury only what's in evidence as 326I and 326J. Only what's in evidence as, okay. And then the government says, are those photographs reflected in image 2026 and image 2025? The witness says, yes, they are. The government says, and are you able to determine from reviewing government exhibit 326 when those two photographs were taken? Mr. Wilson says February 3rd of 2018. The government says, are you able to determine what device was used to take those two photographs? Mr. Wilson said, yes. Thank you so much, Michelle. Thank you. He said, yes. iPad, Apple iPad Pro. The government said, and was that also the same device that was listed for the photographs that you just testified about a moment ago? Mr. Wilson said, yes. The government says, and I'm going to take you back to 326 for a moment from you. Ms. Geddes says, and I'm going to show you what's in evidence as government exhibit 327. And this can be shown to everyone. The government says, and this right here is page 4 of government's exhibit. Ms. Geddes says, oh, I'm sorry, it can't be shown to everyone. I apologize, Your Honor. Can I just show it to the jury only? The judge says, yes. The government says, all right, I'm showing the jury only what's in evidence as government exhibit 327. The judge said, the jury says, can you briefly describe what is shown where my pen is and reflected there, just generally speaking? Mr. Wilson says, that's usually what happens. It's showing a video, and those are thumbnails from the video showing segments of it. The government says, all right, and that particular file is identified as file name IMG 930MOV. Is that correct? Mr. Wilson says, yes, it is. The government said, and that is one of the videos featured on government exhibit 327A and B. That CD that you reviewed previously. Mr. Wilson said, yes, it is. The government says, and from looking at government exhibit 327, are you able to determine on what day that video was created? Mr. Wilson said, yes, January 14, 2018. The government says, and are you able to determine what device was used to create that video? Mr. Wilson says, yes, with an iPad Pro, Apple iPad Pro. The government says, and now I want to direct your attention. The judge says, could I just see the parties at the side for a minute, just with the court reporter? Okay, y'all. Okay. We're about to get into some real stuff with the court reporter. Here we go. The judge says, I just want to clarify, are those thumbnails of some videos? They're not? Ms. Geddes says no. So what I'm going to, these two videos are in evidence from yesterday. What we played yesterday. I'm not going to show the thumbnails for the videos in question. I'm only going to establish the date that they were made. That's it. The judge says, okay, do you object to counsel doing that as a group? Mr. Cannon said, not at all. The judge says, okay, rather than going through each one, it is riveting. The government says, I understand it is riveting. The judge says, if there is a way to do it, if they do not object to the dates, it may move things along if your witness needs more time to get here. Ms. Geddes says, she literally just walked in. The judge says, okay, we will take a little break, but it seems to me there is not a whole lot of dispute about where these came from and what the dates are. And so if we can just say, I mean, I think it is fine to say them as a group. Government says, yes, they're listed a little bit differently, but I'll do my best to move it along. The judge says, yes, I just think if nobody is disputing it, there's no reason to. Mr. Cannon says, I'm not disputing it. Scholar says, I'm not disputing it. The judge says, just in terms of what the basic foundation also. Ms. Geddes says, yes. The judge says, okay, sidebar ends. The judge keeps saving their butt, don't she? All right. Ms. Geddes says, and you have testified about the creation date of several photographs and now 2 videos. And on the examination reports, thank you, Ms. Karen J. On the examination reports that you have seen, have you seen both a create one field that says creation time and date, and then below it says created date and time? Mr. Wilson says yes. The government says, and is the created date and time the date at which the photograph or video was taken by a particular device? Mr. Wilson says yes. The government says, and the create and that is located at the, I just want to make sure that I have not misspoken. All right, just looking at the government exhibit 327 again, where my finger is pointed, there is something at the top that says created date and time, and then it goes on to say UTC. And then there's another created date and time, local it is, and created date and time local. That is the date on which the video or photograph was taken. Mr. Wilson says, yes, it is. The government says, okay, and at least, and with respect to this video, there the created date and time is the above that the date which is report was created. Mr. Wilson said, yes, it is. The government said not the date when it was the photograph itself or the video itself was taken, correct? Mr. Wilson says, that's correct. Ms. Geddes says nothing further. The judge says, okay, any cross-examination? So y'all listen very closely. The defense wanted to get that damn witness off that stand quicker than anything. And if it weren't for that judge, the government was about to ask that one big golden question. Can you explain what you saw in them videos? Y'all, I think we're going to stop there. Let me see. This 25, 45. Let me see. Let me go a little bit longer. Let me see the court now. Now we do need a few minutes to break. Ms. Geddes says maybe just a 5-minute break, Your Honor. The judge says it is never really 5. It is never really 5. I think we will take it 10 minutes just because of the weather. We have a little difficulty getting some of the people here. So I just want to make sure everything is in place. So 10 minutes. Please do not talk about the case. All rise. The court says, all right, everybody can sit down. And unless anybody has anything they want to discuss, and we can recess it for a little bit. All right. Do you really think 5 minutes? Ms. Geddes says yes. The court says okay. The judge says, let's get everybody out here. Thank you. Do we have everyone? Are we missing anybody? That I thought, that's what I thought. Do you know where she is? Mr. Farinella says she is nearby. I think she went to the bathroom, Your Honor. The judge says, okay, thanks. She is just not here right now, but we will be back soon, right? Great. Okay. Why don't we get the witness and then we will see. She will move on. We will move on from here. The witness enters the courtroom. The judge says, okay, let's get the jury, please. The clerk says, all rise. The jury comes into the courtroom. The clerk says, you may be seated. The judge says, all right, we're ready to proceed with the next witness. Will you please call the witness? The government says, we call Alexis. And then the clerk says, please stand. Please stand and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony that you are about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? The witness says, I do. And the clerk says, you may be seated. The court says you can take off your mask. Give me one moment, y'all. All right. Let's get back to it. Okay. Says here, just a couple of things before we begin. I want to make sure the jury can hear you and that our court reporter can take down everything that you say. So please speak into the microphone and speak slowly. The witness says, okay. Then the judge says, if there is a question that you want to have clarified or repeated, let me know and I will tell the lawyer to rephrase it. The witness says, okay. The judge says, just that same thing about making sure that the court reporter can take everything down. Just do not talk, or whichever lawyer is asking you questions, don't talk over. The lawyer is asking you questions. Do your best just to answer the question that you are being asked, okay? The witness says, okay. The judge says, let's make sure the microphone is on. Just tap it, and there is a button there. Try now. The witness says it's on. The judge says, cannot hear you. That is good. All right. So pull it down a little bit closer to you. Great. Go ahead. All right. So we have Alexis here now, y'all. We have Alexis. So it says, having been duly sworn, was examined and testified as follows. The government says, good morning, good afternoon. Alexis says, hi. The government says, hello. Okay, I'm going to have to switch this up, y'all. Because y'all know Alexis and Alexa are really, really close to each other. So this Alexa going to talk. So we will have to be very crafty with this. Okay. Here we go. Let me see. I'm just going to say the witness. Okay. The witness. All right. The government says, I'm showing the witness only what's been marked for identification as government's Exhibit 63. Do you recognize what is shown in 63? The witness says, yes, that's myself. The government says, is that a photo of you? The witness says, yes. The government says, the government offers 63. Candidate says, no objection. The judge says, all right, no objection. All right, it is in. Government Exhibit 63 was received in evidence. The government says, and then I'm showing the witness only what's been marked for identification as 63A. And then the witness says, the 63A show, I'm sorry, the government says the 63A show the same photograph in Government Exhibit 63. The witness says, yes. The government says, and beneath that, is that your true first and last name? The witness says, it is. The government says, the government offers 63 and asks that it be published just to the jury. The witness, the judge says, any objection? Candidate says none. The judge says, okay, you can publish it just to the jury. Government Exhibit 63A has been received in evidence. Let me see. The government says, for today, I'm just going to refer to you as Alexis. Okay? She says, okay. The government says, how old are you? She says, I'm 31. The government says, when is your birthday? She says, July 9th, 1990. The government says, are you employed? She says, I am. The government says, what do you do? She says, I'm a registered nurse. The government says, and where were you raised? In what city? She says, Jacksonville, Florida. Oh, I think I know who Alexis is. Isn't that, is this Holly? Is this Holly Calhoun, y'all? I think. I don't know. I could be wrong. I think this is Haley Calhoun, I think. All right, the government said, the judge says, keep up. Okay. Court says, and keep your voice up. The witness says, okay. That's my baby girl birthday. Okay. Oh, it's not. I think it is Haley. Okay. I thought Haley was from North Carolina. Haley from South Carolina. Okay. This is the hairstylist. No, I don't think so. Okay. Okay. All right. I don't know. I'm guessing. I don't know. Okay. So this is hair. Okay. Whoever it is, we'll figure it out. The judge says that is much better. Thanks. The witness says, okay. The government says, did you graduate with your high school class? She says, I did not. The government says, what happened? She said, I dropped out, then later got my GED. The government says, and how old were you when you stopped going to high school before you got your GED? She said, I was probably 16 or 17. The government says, and after getting your GED, did you continue your education? She said, I did. The government said, and were you still in school today? Are you still in school today? She says, I am. The government says, and where are you in school? She said, for a nurse practitioner, my master's of science and nursing. The government said, and did you previously get your bachelor's degree in nursing? She said, I did. The government says, I'm showing what's in evidence as government exhibit 1. The government says, do you recognize the individual known in government exhibit 1? She said, yes, I do. She said, who is that? She said, the defendant, Robert Kelly. The government said, and do you see him in court today? She said, yes, I do. The government said, can you point him out and describe an article of his clothing? She said, he has on a blue tuxedo on. The government said, let the record reflect that the witness has identified the defendant. The court says, yes. The court says, do you personally know the defendant, Robert Kelly? She said, I do. The government said, where did you first meet him? She said, in Jacksonville, Florida. The government said, and where was it that you met him in Jacksonville? She said, it was at a concert. She said, do you remember who the headliner of the concert was, who was headlining it? She said, I believe it was him at the Light It Up tour. The government said, do you recall when the concert took place? She said, it was sometime in 2006. The government said, and how old were you at the time of this concert? She said, I believe 15, turning 16 that year. The government said, and approximately how old is the defendant? She said, oh, I don't know. The government said, who did you attend the concert with? She said, family and a friend, my mother, my uncle, and then one of my good friends. The government said, whose idea was it to attend the concert? She said, it was kind of a collective idea, but mostly my mom. And the government said, would you describe yourself as a fan of the defendant's music back in 2006? She said, yes, I would. The government said, and where in the venue were you sitting? And then she said, in the front row. The government said, what if any interaction did you have with the defendant or his associates that night? She said, we were asked to come backstage, and we kind of hung out for the night, went to a club called the Leopard Lounge, and then later went to IHOP. The government said, now you said you were asked to go backstage. Do you recall who you asked to go backstage? She said it was some man. I was taking that it was from someone from his entourage. The government said, and how did that individual go about asking you to come backstage? She said, he just walked up to me and Elizabeth and stated that Rob wanted us to meet him backstage in the back. The witness said, and you just referenced Elizabeth. The government said, and you just referenced Elizabeth. Is that your good friend who you went to the concert with as well? Alexa said, yes. The government said,
yes.
Oh, gosh, okay. The government said, and you testified earlier that you went backstage. Who initially went backstage? The witness said, it was just myself and Elizabeth at first, but then it was my family after that. The witness said, and what, if any, interaction did you have with the defendant when you and your friend Elizabeth first went backstage? She said, we just talked about the show, and then he asked who we were with. I told him I was there with my family, and then he invited them backstage with us. The witness said, the government said, and did your family then go backstage? The witness said, yes. the government said, now you mentioned that after speaking with the defendant backstage that you went somewhere else. Is that correct? The witness says, yes. We stayed there for, I don't recall the amount of time, but we were playing cards, eating, and then we left to go to the club after that. What kind of club your little 15-year-old butt gonna be going to at 15 or 16? I'm tripping. Okay, here we go. The government said, and what was the name of the club where you went? The Leopard Lounge. The government said, and who went to the club with you? She said, we all did. The government said, to include your family and your friend Elizabeth? She said, yes. The government said, as well as the defendant? She said, yes. The government said, where, if anywhere, did you go after going to the club? She said, IHOP. The government said, the restaurant? She said, mm-hmm. The government said, do you remember who went to the IHOP? She said, we all did. The government said, and again, with your mom, and did you say with your stepfather? She said, yes. The government said, and what, if any, arrangements did you make to communicate with the defendant after that night? She said, I just told him that I would be calling him, and he informed me that he was going to be at the Avenues Mall the next day. The government said, and how were you going to get in contact with him? She said, via cell phone. The government said, did he give you his number? She said, yes. Wow. The government said, and did you make arrangements to see him again? She said, I did. The government said, where did you arrange to see him? The government said, the next day that I saw him was the day after the concert at the Avenues Mall. The government said, and do you remember how you got to the Avenues Mall that day? She said, yes, by car. The government said, did you go by yourself or with somebody else? She said, Elizabeth took me. The government said, and at the time, did you have your driver's license? She said, I may have had my permit. I'm not sure if I had my license at the time. The government said, you were 15 years old at the time. The witness said, so it would have been the permit. What the hell is he doing meeting a 15 or 16-year-old at the mall? What the hell is wrong with these parents taking their kids to the club? You know what, y'all? Let me read. I'm sorry. I don't want to be okay. Let me read. Okay. Okay. And where within the Avenues Mall did you arrange to meet the defendant? She said, I met him on the bus tour. The government said, and do you remember where the bus tour or where the bus was parked? She said, it was in the parking lot. The government said, of the Avenues Mall. She said, yes, ma'am. Hold on. She said, she said, yes, ma'am. The government said, you arrived at the mall. Was the defendant on the tour bus? She said he was not. The government said, what did you do when you arrived? The witness said, I got to the tour bus. I let him know that I was there, and he told me to just go on the bus and wait for him, and that he was coming. He was finishing up shopping. The government said, approximately, did you eventually see the defendant that day? She said, I did. Government said, approximately how long was it before you saw the defendant? The witness said, it may have been an hour, maybe two, but I wasn't really sure. The government said, and where did you eventually see the defendant? She said, on the tour bus. The government said, do you remember whether anyone else was on the tour bus with you and the defendant? She said, no. It was just us. The government said, and what, if anything, was your friend Elizabeth doing while you were waiting on the tour bus? The witness said she was waiting for me. She might have went inside briefly, but she was just waiting for me to get done. The government said, and when you said she might have went inside, did she ever come inside the tour bus? The witness says, no, inside the mall. The government says, okay, what happened when the defendant arrived on the tour bus itself? She said he walked in and then kind of just generally talked about the next city that he would be going to. And then I signed a non-disclosure. The government said, how did it come to be that you signed a non-disclosure? The witness said, he just told me that I should never take pictures, and I just was told to sign it, so I did. The government said, did you receive a copy of that non-disclosure agreement? She said, I did not. The government said, and were you asked to provide any identification when you signed that non-disclosure? She said, no. The government said, do you recall having a discussion with the defendant about your age? She said, yes, I may have, but this general response was just there's nothing wrong with the platonic friendship. And at that time, and then if it turns into something over time, then so be it. The government said, at any point, did you hide your true age from the defendant? She said, no. The government says, do you recall what types of or what topics you discussed with the defendant on the tour bus? She said, I don't. I believe it was just where he was going next. The government said, how, if at all, did you communicate with the defendant after you saw him on the tour bus at the Avenues Mall? She said, I would call or text him via cell phone. It was just random. The government said, did you eventually see the defendant again? She said, I did. The government said, do you have a clear memory as to the next time or next location where you saw the defendant? She said, I do not. The government says, did you ultimately have a sexual relationship with the defendant while you were still in your teens? She said, when I was still in my teens, I'm not sure. Like 18 or over. I don't really recall when the first relation was between me and him. The government says, do you remember where you were when you first had sexual contact with the defendant? She said, in Chicago. The government said, where in Chicago? She said, at his Olympia Fields home. The government says, and did you ultimately travel to Chicago to see the defendant at his home in Olympia Fields? She said, I did. The government said, on one occasion or more than one occasion? She said, more than one occasion. The government said, and when did you travel to see the defendant in Chicago? And when you did travel to see the defendant in Chicago, how often did you have to have sexual contact with him during these trips? The witness says, it would be kind of random. Sometimes it was just we didn't have sexual intercourse, but it was usually related to something that came up in between a menstrual cycle or he was busy. The government said, now when you saw the defendant and you were not on your menstrual cycle, did you have sexual contact with the defendant? She said, for the most part. The government said, yes. She said, yes. The government said, and when you were with the defendant, if any, was there any protection did he use? She said, none. The government said, what, if anything, did he ever tell you about having any sexually transmitted diseases that he had? She said, none. The government said, to your knowledge, have you ever contracted a STD from the defendant? She said, no. The government said, aside from seeing the defendant in your teens, and now using teens to refer to 15, when you met him until 19. She said, okay, do you remember, did you see the defendant in cities other than Chicago? She said, I believe Miami. Government says, when you saw the defendant in Miami, were you still living in Jacksonville? She said, yes, I was. The government said, approximately how far is Miami from Jacksonville? She said, 5.5 hours driving. The government says, and do you remember how you got from your home in Jacksonville to Miami to see the defendant? She says, I drove to the Avenues Mall, and then the tour bus, picked me up and took me to Alabama. The government said the Avenues Mall was the mall in Jacksonville where you first met the defendant. She said, correct. The government said, and you testified that the tour bus that you took from the Avenues Mall to the Miami, Avenues Mall in Jacksonville to Miami, do you know how that was arranged? She said, I believe I called him and he informed me that he was in Miami. So I asked him if I could come see him and he had to set it up. The government said, and when you say he and him, now are you referring to the defendant? She said, I am. The government said, do you remember who, if anyone else, was on the tour bus when you traveled from Jacksonville to Miami to see the defendant? She said, it was just the driver and myself, Terry. She said, the driver and myself and Terry. The government said the bus driver's name was Terry. She said, yes. The government said, do you remember his last name? She said, I do not. The government said, do you recall during that particular trip when you took the tour bus from Jacksonville to Miami? Do you recall how long you stayed in Miami? The witness says it might have been a night, but I'm not sure, 100% sure. The government says, okay, so is it fair to say your memory is a little bit shaky when it comes to that time frame? The witness says, yes, that was over 15 years ago. Hold on. So if it was over 15 years ago, and she says she's 31 now, so she had to be right around 15 to 16 years old when she stayed overnight. Let me make sure I'm right. Hold on. Do you recall during that particular trip when you took the tour bus from Jacksonville to Miami, do you recall how long you stayed in Miami? She said it may have been a night, but I'm not 100% sure. The government said, okay, is it fair to say your memory is a little bit shaky when it comes to that time frame? She said, yes. That was over 15 years ago. Wow. Y'all, she was a freaking minor. FYI, age of consent here in Florida is 18. This man, she was underage. If it was 15 years ago and she's 31, as she stated, last time I checked, 15 minus 30 is 15 plus 1, that's 16 years old. Wow. The government said, what, if anything, do you recall going on in Miami when you got there? She said, I believe he was at the hospital because I think he may have had a ruptured appendix, and I was seeing him post-surgery. Government says, do you remember why the defendant was in Miami in the first place? She said, I do not. The government said approximately, not approximately. How old were you in February of 2017? Thank you. She said 16. I know my math, y'all. 16. What the hell you doing staying overnight at 16 years old with a grown man? Aside from that particular trip to Miami, do you recall any other trips in Miami while you were still in your teens? She said, I don't. The government said, was there a time when there was a video shoot in Miami? She said, there may have been, not a video shoot, but there may have been recordings while we were eating at the McDonald's, I believe. Government says, do you remember where that McDonald's, what city that McDonald's was located in? She said, I believe it's Miami. There was a responsibility. It could have been in Jacksonville, but it was in Florida. The witness said, yes. The government said, what, if anything, do you remember about being recorded on that occasion that you just referenced? The witness said, we were just all sitting around eating and kind of just joking around. The government said, when you say we were all just eating and sitting around eating, who do you recall being there? She said, it was just part of his entourage, and him and me. Government said, again, referring to the defendant and his entourage. She said, yes. The government said, what, if anything, do you recall thinking while that video was being made? She said, I was just wondering about being in the video. The government said, why were you worried about being in the video? She said, because of the relation of who he is and, just being there. Because of the relation of who he is and, just being there. The government said, do you have memory as to not your exact age, but anything about your age at the time in that video? She said, I'm pretty sure I was probably 17 at that time. The government says, why do you remember? Why do you believe you were 17 at that time? She said, I just know I wasn't of age because of the recording. The government says, what do you mean by that? She said, because of how I felt whenever the recording was going on. The government says, can you explain, just so the jury understands what you were concerned about, what you're referring to? She said, because I was under the age of 18 and being on recording was a concern for me. The government said, now, just to be clear, in the McDonald's, I think you testified that the video was being recorded in the McDonald's. What type of video was being recorded? She says, I think it was just a videography of what was going on at the time. The government says, as you sit here today, do you know who was making that recording? She says, I don't. The government said, you testified earlier that you traveled to Chicago to see the defendant while you were still in your teens. Is that correct? She said, yes. The government says, how do you travel from Jacksonville to Chicago? She said, a plane. The government said, when you traveled to Chicago, did you have a cell phone? The witness said, I did. The government said, would you bring your cell phone with you? She said, I would. The government said, who arranged your travel from Jacksonville to Chicago? She said, sometimes I would reach out to him and tell him I would want to come, and he would either get it set up or I would talk to a runner or someone. The government said, again, the he is referring to the defendant. She said, yes. The government said, and you mentioned that you would speak with a runner. What do you mean, a runner? She said, I guess his employees. The government said, other than traveling to Chicago, did you otherwise fly when you were under 18 years old? She said, no. The government said, referring to the time when you were in your teens, I think you testified. You tell me, where would you stay when you visited the defendant? She said, most of the time in his home in Olympia Fields, and what I believe was the master bedroom. The government said, do you recall how you would get to Olympia Fields, to the defendant's house in Olympia Fields from the airport? She said, sometimes either by taxi or someone would come pick me up, one of his workers. Oh my gosh, man. Wow. Government said, when you arrived at the defendant's residence, do you recall having to sign a second non-disclosure agreement? She said, no.
I'm not sure I understand.
Yeah, I don't understand either, computer, but stop talking. I don't understand this either. It's crazy. The government said, now, what would happen when you arrived at the defendant's residence in Olympia Fields? She said, for the most part, whenever I would arrive, I would drop my things off in the room, and usually I was tired. I would probably sleep or what have you. I would let him know that I was there. If I wanted to go to the mall or whatever I wanted to go, I would tell him and they would take me. The government said, initially when you got from the inside of the residence, how would you get to the room where you were staying? She said, I was escorted there. The government said, what, if any, communication would you have with the others while you were at the defendant's residence in Olympia Fields? She said, can you clarify the question? She said, sure. I think you mentioned earlier that if you wanted to go to the mall, you would contact someone. Is that correct? She said, yes. The government said, who would you contact? She said, usually whoever scheduled my flight, or I would call him and tell him I wanted to go somewhere, or just whoever it was at the time that I was able to reach out to. The government said, again, when you say that you would call him, you're referring to the defendant. She said, yes. The government said, now, what about if you wanted to eat? Were you eat while you were at the defendant's home or house in Olympia Fields? She said, yes, they had a menu. So it was a book. They called it room service. You could order whatever you wanted from nearby restaurants. So I would just call them and tell them what I want, whatever it was that I was wanting. The government said, who would you call? The witness said either the runners or him, the defendant. The government said, did you, you think you testified that you believe on one occasion that you stayed in the defendant's master bedroom. Is that correct? She said, yes. The government said, now, were there other locations in the defendant's house where that you would spend time? She said, yes. The government said, where else do you remember spending time when you were at the defendant's house? She said, in the studio or in the living room area. There was a room that was adjacent to there. I stayed in that room. There was also like a studio, not a studio, but like a cigar room area, as well as a theater. The government said, and you mentioned that the room that was adjacent to the living room, what, if anything, do you remember about that room? She said that was a mirror on the ceiling. The government said, now, you also mentioned that on occasion that you were in the studio. Was there a particular room in the studio where you would spend time? She said the recording room. The government said, what, if anything, do you remember about the recording room where you spent time? The witness says it was just kind of like wooden, like a log cabin feel. The government said, were you ever in the garage at the defendant's residence? Y'all, that is where we are going to stop for the night. We done been on here for 2 hours. 2 hours, 2 hours, 2 hours, 2 hours. Y'all, please. I'm tripping. I gotta see what was the last page. Go back on the video and look at it. Hold on, y'all. Let me pull this back up so y'all can give me the page number. What's day 11? All right, I'm sorry. Could y'all hear me? Could y'all hear me? I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm here, y'all. I'm here. I'm sorry about that. Yeah, y'all, we're going to stop right there. We're going to stop right there. We're going to stop right there. Somebody type in the chat 2568. 2568, y'all. Somebody type 2568 in the chat for me, please. Thank y'all very much. All right, y'all. I'm going to let y'all get going. Got to get ready for work tomorrow. I love y'all. Thank y'all for coming in. If y'all would please like this video as you go out of the video, please like the video. Also, please share the video. If you are new to this channel, which I see some new people here, please subscribe to the channel. Whenever I go live, push the top notification bell to push all, and you will get all the notifications that when I do go live. Also, for those of you that don't know, I do a morning show in the morning called Atmos in the Morning. So tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock, I do come on. I do recaps of the R. Kelly trial. Also, we do talk about some community things. We talk about all kind of stuff that's going on in the world, a little bit of entertainment news. So I think y'all would enjoy that. So God bless y'all. Thank y'all for coming over. And I will holler at y'all tomorrow. I will post when I'm going live tomorrow. Okay? God bless y'all. Y'all have a blessed night. Peace.
Oh, no.
I don't need negative energy, wrap me in positive synergy. I have been doubted through life, been there and done that with trifling people who told me my style would not work. I told them they wrong, been struggling too long. This song is for you, I'm proving you wrong. Get out my way, get out my way, get out my way, get out my way.
I'm a genuine person. Like if I love you, I love you. If I don't mess with you, I don't mess with you. It's as simple as that.